Good evening, and welcome to the Shrewsbury School Committee meeting of November 30th, 2020. First, I'd like to thank Liz Poplowski and the members of the Shrewsbury Media Connection for recording and live broadcasting this event. This meeting will be rebroadcast on Channel 29 between now and our next scheduled meeting, and is also available on the SMC YouTube channel. The first item on our agenda is public participation. Tonight, nobody has expressed interest in addressing the committee. However, in the future, if anybody wishes to participate in this portion of our meeting, they should contact the chairperson prior to the beginning of the meeting, and once recognized, may have up to 3 minutes to present their material. We will also review and consider any written comments which may be presented to us before or after any meetings. Next item up on the agenda is chairperson and members' reports. Colleagues, do you have anything tonight? No. And the only thing I would note is I want to really thank the people who came out for our kickoff of our strategic planning event a couple of weeks ago. There'll be much more to come on this and many more opportunities for the community, but really appreciated the energy and enthusiasm for all of the participants who attended. And with that, I will turn it over, Dr. Sawyer, for superintendent's report.
Thank you, Ms. Heffernan. And along those lines, there is a web page that we've created on our website for our strategic planning initiative, and the notes that were created by our consultants from that evening are posted there, and we'll be posting other information and other documents there as we go through the process. But I also appreciated those who came out for that event. In terms of superintendent's report this evening, I would like to commend the folks at Shrewsbury High School who put on a unified Thanksgiving feast prior to the holiday. I want to commend in particular the Family Consumer Sciences teacher Shirley LeMay, along with working with Erica Pratt, who is the department head for that department, as well as physical education and health, is actually here with us this evening, and Ms. Pam LeBlanc, who is the director of our visual arts department, who all collaborated to work with, much like our other unified athletics or unified club, where students with special needs worked together with peers at Shrewsbury High School to put together a wonderful meal in the foods class there. So they did a terrific job. There's a great article in the recent edition of the Community Advocate that I would encourage people to read, and really want to commend them for that terrific work. I also want to thank those in the community who have donated to the Colonial Fund on Giving Tuesday. Kathleen Cohane just sent out today another email. Our goal was to raise $10,000 on Giving Tuesday, which would be matched by another $10,000, and we're almost there, $9,000. And our very generous anonymous donor is willing to match through the end of the week. So if anyone is interested in donating, you can click right on the Colonial Fund link on our website, or look to your email that was sent out earlier today. And we're very, very grateful. The focus of this fundraising is to support career pathways programming at Shrewsbury High School, which will help us with expenses associated with career exploration, on-the-job training, internships, job shadowing, summer employment, et cetera. We've been doing a lot of work there under Dr. Lazat's leadership and those at Mr. Zidlow and the high school team, and we're looking forward to doing more, and this funding will certainly help us do that. So that's an important part of our current strategic plan that we're trying to move forward. And that is superintendent's report this evening.
Excellent. Thank you so very much. Our first time scheduled appointment is the Student Advisory Committee from Shrewsbury High School. I'm going to welcome you on up. Under Massachusetts Education Reform Act, school districts are required to have a Student Advisory Committee, that we call the SAC, consisting of 5 high school students who are elected by the student body. The SAC is required to meet with the school committee during the year to review various issues of concern to the student body, and I will also acknowledge Mr. Andrew Smith, who is their one of our teachers and serves as their faculty advisor, who is here with us this evening. But I believe I can turn it over to Shalini, the newer chair, to get us started.
Hello, my name is Shalini Biju. I am a senior and I am the new chairperson of the Student Advisory Committee. Thank you so much for having us here today to share our agenda. My fellow members will now go down the line and introduce themselves.
I'm Laura and I'm a senior.
I'm Nicole and I'm a senior.
I'm Anya and I'm a junior.
I'm Siri and I'm a junior.
Student life. As a senior, this year has been off to a wonderful start. Balancing school and applications has been both stressful and rewarding. I really appreciate having senior celebrations as it has been a great way to celebrate our last year at the high school. I've definitely felt the class spirit, and I'm very grateful to have lenient teachers and staff to support me through this time.
As I've entered senior year, I've started to think more about what I want to do after high school, and I've begun applying to colleges. I'm also handling AP classwork. Although seniors are a little stressed with applications due, we're glad to have the support of our teachers and counselors and are eager to continue our last year of high school strong.
I agree with Shalini and Laura with much of what they said about senior year. I've also been adjusting to the new waterfall schedule. Lunch feels much less crowded, and the new routine has been both refreshing and a bit confusing.
Junior year has been stressful due to the added pressures that this year brings, but the SHS staff and teachers have done an amazing job in guiding all of my class members. In addition, the fun events that have already taken place give me and others a lot of excitement during this school year. This includes Colonial Way, the activity fair, and even homecoming, which we have not done in many years.
Despite the added pressures that come with being a junior in high school, this year has already been off to a great start. Clubs have always been a central aspect of the Shrewsbury High School community, and this year isn't any different. As we enter the 2022 club season, students across all grades are beginning to explore their interests as a collective group. It's relieving to have a sense of normalcy within these smaller communities.
Gym grading system. This year, the gym department has gone back to grading on a 10-point scale rather than 3. The 10th point is earned by a student that goes above and beyond, taking it further than just participation. For example, earning this 10th point may include cleaning up the gym after everyone is dismissed, or even leading warm-ups. This year, a lot of students have had mixed feelings towards this new but old system, specifically regarding this 10th point and how to earn it. As a result, students at SHS met with the Director of Physical Education, and they mutually agreed on making the rubric more specific so students understand how they can earn this 10th point. In addition, there was also an appeal form created that students can fill out at the end of each day if they feel they deserve the 10th point and did not earn one.
Senior Cookout and Senior Sunrise. Our annual Senior Cookout was held on October 1st. Parents were helping out with the grill, handing out t-shirts, and serving food. Students got to play various lawn games, and we got the results for the yearbook senior superlatives. We also had our student-organized Senior Sunrise right before the Spirit Rally. The senior class arrived at 6 a.m. at the high school to watch the beautiful sunrise. We brought coffee, donuts, and blankets. There was even a student flipping pancakes. This was a great first senior celebration, and we are incredibly excited for all of the events to come.
Spirit Week. Spirit Week was a major success with a lot of participation from each grade. We began our themed week with Class Color Day, followed by Adam Sandler Day, Y2K Day, Cultural Day, and of course, Blue and Gold on the day of the Spirit Rally. As for the Spirit Rally, Kathy Nguyen, class marshal, choreographed an amazing senior entrance. For the class cup, seniors came out victorious in every event, which included dizzy bat, sprint relay, tug-of-war, and teacher sled race. The senior class also won the class banner competition, which we have our own Shalini Biju to thank.
Homecoming. For the first time in 8 years, the classic homecoming dance returned to SHS. Situated in the Commons, members of the student government transformed the area into a lively setting with string lights and photo booth decorations. We are proud to report that the event was a huge success with over 400 tickets sold and around 350 students attending. Due to the recent termination of the activity fund, all proceeds were directed towards clubs and after-school activities within SHS. It was amazing to not only see the revival of this tradition, but also end our Spirit Week on a high note.
School Pulse. Recently, SHS started a collaboration with School Pulse, an automated messaging system focusing on improving mental health among students. Students who sign up will be texted regularly about how their day was and how they're feeling, and will be directed to appropriate resources if necessary. So far, it looks like it's been a great resource for students.
No homework weekends. To account for significant days in our calendar year, 15 no homework dates have been introduced. For the student body, this has been a relieving decision. These stress-free periods of time enable them to regroup and relax. On the other hand, quite a few teachers have expressed worries on reaching curriculum checkpoints with no work days. Many of the AP teachers, particularly those in history and sciences, are concerned about preparing their students for the end-of-year exams.
Co-curriculars at SHS. SHS students have been enjoying and getting involved with various co-curriculars. We've had a great time doing the things we love outside of the school day.
SHS Performing Arts Department Fall Concert. On October 13th, the SHS Performing Arts Department held their fall concert.
the high school wind ensemble, mixed choir, chamber orchestra, treble choir, and chamber choir all performed during this musical evening. Mr. Blyer did a wonderful job leading the wind ensemble and is acclimated well into the SHS environment. Additionally, Mr. Proctor, who was recently welcomed as the new high school orchestra director, did an outstanding job of leading the chamber orchestra. The performances were all fantastic, and the concert was a great success.
Fall sports. Over the summer, all captains for every sport attended a leadership summit. They were told 3 words to define this year's season: effort, attitude, and discipline. Already, our sports teams have accepted these challenges, and this fall season has started in triumph. Some highlights include beating our long-term rivals St. John's 18-15 at the very popular Colonial Way game and beating Algonquin at the homecoming game 28-0. In addition, the girls field hockey team got to go to the Final Four for states. Additionally, huge congrats to the cheerleading team for winning regionals with their great routine. The list of successes goes on, but it is safe to say that this year, SHS is pumped up and ready to compete. SHS events/fundraisers. As the school year progresses, students have been actively participating in various events and fundraisers to make positive contributions to our community.
Colonial Way. On September 16th, SHS held their annual Colonial Way Fair, where clubs got a chance to promote themselves and raise money. Every booth had unique and fun activities or goods for students, from a dunk tank to a bake sale. The fair had a spectacular turnout, and clubs were able to raise a lot of money. Congratulations to the SHS swim team for raising the highest amount of money with $457.
Spirit of Shrewsbury. After several years of COVID hold, the Spirit of Shrewsbury is back up and running at full force. They had a great first day, beginning with the expo at Oak. There were a bunch of food trucks as well as many booths for various organizations and local businesses. The Sunday parade also had a great turnout. India Society of Worcester won Best Float, and all of us got to participate in a class government float as well.
Pink fundraisers. October was a special month because it was Breast Cancer Awareness Month. SHS showed their support in various ways. For example, many of our sports teams brought awareness to breast cancer by wearing pink at games. In fact, this year, many of our groups here at SHS have partnered to offer a t-shirt for students, staff, and community members to purchase, with proceeds going to a local cancer charity. To add, SHS continued with their annual Color Cup event, Coins for a Cure, which raised $871 for the Breast Cancer Research Foundation. Finally, the Student Council decided to make a ribbon display honoring those who have survived, are still fighting, or have passed away due to cancer in efforts to show their support.
Gold cards. Every year, various sports teams at SHS fundraise for their teams with gold cards. These cards cost $25, and whoever buys them gets many multi-use benefits that are valid for a year. These span across a variety of local stores. SHS has sold almost 1,411 cards, with football selling the most with 327 cards sold. The SHS community has been working hard to ensure their sports teams have had a successful season.
SSMA fundraiser. Moving to the C-Wing, the 2022 SSMA Drive was yet another bright start to the year. Over 75 students from performing arts attended the fundraiser on September 9th. Divided into smaller groups, they went door to door selling season passes to all of our concerts here at SHS. The amount raised by the C-Wingers amounted to a bold $7,477, helping fund uniforms, new instruments, and music for all performing groups, including our relatively new chapter of United Sound. We hope to see many of the season ticket holders at our future concerts.
Kids Night Out. Before COVID, SHS held multiple Kids Night Out multiple times a year to provide student council and different clubs funds for their activities. In addition, kids across the town from ages 5 through 12 got to play games, watch movies, eat food, and have fun with students from SHS. Shout out to the Student Council and Community Service Learning Advisory Board for perfectly representing the students at SHS. Respectful, hardworking, and kind. After getting almost 350 kids to participate, the largest amount in KNO history, these two clubs raised almost $5,468.
Thank you for your continued support of the SAC, and we can take any questions at this time.
Thank you so very much. Colleagues, any questions or comments? Please, Mr. Pellich.
First of all, thank you for your informative presentation. As always, it's always great to hear your perspective. I'm just curious if you could elaborate on the School Pulse program, the program where you're texted about wellness. What are you asked? How do you respond? What happens when you respond?
So I'm actually signed up for the program. They have a theme where they basically every week they will text you multiple times to ask and just check in on your day. So sometimes they ask you to rate it out of 10, sometimes they ask you to rate out of 3, and also sometimes they ask you to report back on which aspect of your life is the most rewarding in that moment, whether it be sports or academics. And as someone who is enrolled in the program, I definitely do think it is something that is amazing for the student body if they choose to participate. And it is great to just be able to check in frequently with it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your report. It's excellent. I have a student at SHS, and I still learn a lot hearing your report. I did want to ask you a question. With the elimination of the activity fee this year, have you guys seen an increase in participation and students, maybe trying out some new clubs that they necessarily might not have tried because now they're free to try? Do you have any sense of that?
I think people in general are definitely getting a lot more involved in the student body, especially since post-COVID and we're like all back to normal. And I definitely think that people are getting involved in multiple clubs and also starting their own clubs based on their own interests. So I think we've definitely seen that this year.
Great. Thank you.
Question. First of all, great report. Appreciate the feedback. Curious, you mentioned the change to the schedule, the waterfall schedule. I'm curious the feedback that you've received on that, both positive and challenges experienced with that.
I personally like the distribution of having a different class first every period. Usually I have AP Psych first period. That's a lot, but getting that kind of rotating just helps me focus on each class a little bit better.
Yeah, I agree with that too. Usually my AP classes, the bulk of them are at the end of the day, so kind of having them spread out, some of it at the beginning, some of it at the end, really helps with my energy. I've also heard about some on the more negative side, students who have work studies for a very specific time period in the day, which is when their study is. Now that time period shifts around a lot. But I think there are about 11 students participating in work study with a certain number of credits, and I believe the school is working with them to figure out a solution.
Great. Thank you.
I see strong nods from Principal Bazidlo in the back, working on that one. Any other questions? I think I really always appreciate just hearing from you, and hearing your voice is important. And like Ms. Boucher, I have a student at the high school, but I don't get all of this level of detail in what happened at school today. One question I have for you is that we are, as a group and as a district, engaging in strategic planning about what goals do we have for the next 5 years for the district. And I was just speaking with our consultant earlier this week and talking about, I wonder if you might think about it. You can also get back to us. What are good ways that you think we could be connecting with students to ask them? We had an event a few weeks ago, and we had some students come, but you're all busy. It's very hard to get your time. And so I would love if you have ideas or thoughts about ways, even during the school day, that we could be reaching out. I'm hesitant to say we'll do more surveys. We do lots of surveys. We do pulse surveys, we do all kinds of different surveys, but maybe there's other ways. And so if you have thoughts about that, I'd love to hear them, or really would encourage you to kind of take that back and come back to us with other ideas, because we'll be at this for months on end. But any thoughts about what good ways are that you think to kind of get different students' voices to be heard across the schools?
I think a good time that you could connect with people during the school day is during advisory or during homeroom, because I know, especially during advisory, that sometimes teachers don't really have a specific agenda. So especially if you want to connect with freshman students, especially because I know that you ask them a lot of questions for the next 4 years of high school, during their MVP homeroom days where there are senior students in their classrooms, that could work as well.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Sawyer.
I want to thank Shalini and Laura, Nicole, Anya, and Siri for a terrific report. They're excellent representatives for their fellow students at Shrewsbury High School. I think you get a sense that there's a lot that's been happening, and I think you want to use the phrase things are back to normal. And although certainly, just like everywhere else, we're not entirely COVID-free, we are certainly living with it like any other illness, flu, whatever it might be, and it's been very positive to have people engaged again with all of these different activities, which we know are so crucial for the development of our young people. I think the energy has been very positive. I think that I did want to mention that recently, just before the Thanksgiving break, the Student Council and Mr. Pizzillo held their annual town meetings where half the school at a time gathers in the auditorium, and students can just ask any question. The Student Council President and the principal field those questions and give feedback, and I understand that was just another way for us to make sure that we're hearing students' voices as we work to provide the best education we can for you. But again, it's really gratifying to hear all the different things that seem to be going well this fall. There are a lot of things coming up, strategic planning. There's going to be a big presentation right after this about the sleep health and school start time work that we're doing, and I would ask that as that continues, we're going to get that information back of what students, and students were terrific in giving us feedback. We'll hear about that in a moment. We'll certainly would love to hear from the SAC relative to that topic before the school committee makes any decisions about next year. So you 3 seniors won't have to worry about that, but our 2 juniors definitely will. So you have skin in the game, as they say. So with that, thank you very much, and really appreciate your first presentation of the year.
Thank you. Have a nice, lovely evening. Moving on, as Dr. Sawyer mentioned, our next item is on the Shrewsbury Public Schools Sleep Health Advisory Committee, and we have multiple task group reports. So just as some background, this summer, parents, caretakers, school district staff members, and community members were invited to be a part of an ad hoc advisory committee to the superintendent to study the latest research on sleep health for children and adolescents and to consider potential options for adjusting school start times for the 23-24, so next school year. That committee has been meeting regularly throughout the fall and comprises several task groups. We heard from the research task group at our last meeting, summarizing the latest research on sleep health and hygiene, and later school start times, and some best practices for sleep health with children and adolescents. And tonight we have 4 additional task groups to present to us, and so I'm very appreciative for them. And our packet was heavy with material because this group has been putting together a lot of work. So I would encourage also those watching to check out the website for all of those materials because it is really quite impressive. Dr. Sawyer, why don't I turn it over to you?
Thank you. Yeah, I will introduce our groups for this evening and just start by, for those who are maybe tuning in for the first time or hearing about this for the first time, we did convene this fall a Sleep Health Advisory Committee. The purpose of that committee was to study the latest research on sleep health for children and adolescents, as well as research around how school start times have changed. This has been going on probably 3 decades now across the U.S., where school districts have been making decisions to change start times, typically later for adolescents, and it's something that is under consideration as part of our 5-year strategic plan that was through this year. We wanted to make sure after COVID we started that work. The committee has been outstanding, as you referenced. I've been on many committees during my 25 plus years now in Shrewsbury, and it certainly is an incredibly high performing and dedicated group of parents and staff members and students. As it notes on the slide there are 5 different task groups. The one who did the research report presented at your last meeting, and that's posted on our website. And then this evening we're going to hear from a group who's focusing on feedback from our various stakeholder groups, as well as that group who's going to be looking at, who have been researching what other districts have done or not done when it comes to school start times. Childcare, because we know that's such a important consideration. And then logistics, which obviously the logistics and operational elements, anytime you're considering any kind of change in the school schedule for our schools, that's incredibly important to note as well. Just for a timeline, so people understand that, the committee's been meeting. The advisory committee met 5 times so far. We'll continue to meet through January. On November 9th, we had the research report. We then had a thought exchange survey. You'll hear about the results of that in a moment, conducted from November 10th to 17th. This evening, these reports are being presented to the school committee. On November 30th, I'm sorry, that's a double entry there. My apologies. That's this evening. December 12th, We're very fortunate that Dr. Judith Owens, who is an adolescent sleep expert from Boston Children's Hospital and Harvard Medical School, will be providing a public webinar. So we'll publicize that significantly, be up to December 12th. We're hoping it will also be recorded. We haven't confirmed that yet, but that's our hope. And that will hopefully answer some people's questions as well about what the research says on this topic. On December 14th, a school committee meeting, the full Sleep Health Advisory Committee's recommendations for any options for potential school start time changes for next school year, starting in late August of 2023, will be presented. We will send out a survey the following day, a more traditional type survey that asks for feedback on those options, so different stakeholders can weigh in on that. Then in the new year, on January 4th, the school committee will hold a public hearing. Anyone who wants to come to the meeting and give any feedback for the school committee to hear will be that evening. And then the rest of that month, essentially January 18th, I would see as the earliest point that the school committee might choose to make a decision and potentially vote on any changes that you may wish to make next year. We're holding January 25th as a potential date. And my recommendation is that February 1st is our go, no-go date. You get later than that, I think it would be very difficult to have enough lead time for planning and communication and that sort of thing. So somewhere in the January timeframe is when we would ask the school committee to make a decision. So that's where we are with the timeline. And this evening, we'll have these 4 task groups present. So without further ado, I will turn this over to 3 of the members of the feedback task group. We have Sarah Anane, who is a class of 224 Shrewsbury High School member, Hallie Burak, principal at Oak Middle School, and Dr. Jane Lizotte, who is our assistant superintendent for community partnerships and well-being. So welcome, and we look forward to hearing your information about our recent thought exchange survey.
And quick point of order, Dr. Sawyer, we're going to do questions in between each one of
Yeah,
these,
so we're
and
asking each group to present information, and then because there's so much information, any questions the committee has about this particular topic, we'll have a Q&A, then we'll move on to the next task group.
Thank you.
Great, thank you for having us. We are very grateful to have had and to continue to have the opportunity to work with this incredible team, as Dr. Sawyer mentioned, of students, faculty, parents, school committee representatives, each of whom has their own individual perspectives, yet share the collective goal of enhancing the well-being of all students. And it has really been an honor and a privilege for each of us to work together, and I'm very grateful also to this team who is joining me tonight to share what we learned from our stakeholder feedback. Sarah is going to be our co-presenter and has done an awful lot of work to prepare for tonight. So Sarah's going to take it away for the next few minutes or so.
Okay, so I'm going to start off by explaining what Thought Exchange is, and that's the format we use to send out a survey. So with Thought Exchange, participants can share as many thoughts as they wish in response to the open-ended question that we gave them. Participants can rate the importance / the agreement of other people's thoughts, and you can give it 1 to 5 stars. This Thought Exchange software ensures that all thoughts are rated only a certain number of times and by different people, so there's like a different rank for each one. Students can only see and rate other students' thoughts. Parents and caretakers can only see and rate other parents and caretakers' thoughts, and staff can only see and rate other staff members' thoughts. All of the results will be available on the SPS website if you want to see the full report. Here's the open-ended question that we presented, and it was, the Sleep Health Advisory Committee is investigating possibilities to change school start times next year so that older students get more sleep. To inform their work, please share what you see as a potential benefit and challenges if the school start and end times change for 2023 to 2024 school year. Here we thank staff and students, parents, caretakers, everyone who participated in the survey. We had almost 4,000 participants in total. We had 3,126 thoughts from everyone, and we had 67,000 ratings, which was completely outstanding for us.
Great.
Here we have respondents by schools, And as you can see, most of the respondents were at the high school level. 1,466 were students at the high school, and most of the respondents of parents were from the high school level as well, same with staff. But you can see we did get some responses from Oak and Sherwood as well.
We do question the 3 preschoolers.
They have checked the wrong box.
Here you can see a word cloud that was generated by the Thought Exchange program we used. And as you can see, these are kind of what popped up the most. So you can see there was a big emphasis on mental health of students when it came to changing the start times for school. And you can see just words like improve and benefit. So it shows like we want to change this time just to help our students so we can like elevate ourselves educational wise. Here are some top thoughts from students. And as you can see, most of them are about how they want to change the time. And as you can see, the top comment says, I think school should start later than it does right now because sleep is way more important than people think. And without proper rest, kids will not be able to focus, and it's very important. And this got rated 4.3 stars. So you can see out of the 24 people that ranked it, most of them agreed. And just like the comments down below, you can see they're all 4.3. A lot of people agreed with them. And for our lowest ranking student thoughts, you can see that there are some people that don't see the benefit in changing time, or they think we should start earlier or just a little later. And these weren't thoughts that most of the student body necessarily agreed on, which is why they have such low rankings.
And as we continue along to top thoughts from parents and caretakers, the most highly ranked thought included, I would like to see my high schooler start a little later than present time. For a 6:40 bus, for example, they have to be up around 5:45, and as they get older, their work keeps them up late at night, and I worry about barely 6 hours of sleep a day. The second most popular thought included, or rated thought, high school kids need more sleep time. I think school time should change. And the third out of 720 included, this feels overdue to me. We should be looking more at how sleep impacts mental and physical health. We have a crisis of mental health in our youth, and we have to be willing to make changes. And as we look at the lowest rated thoughts from parents and caretakers, this first one that's shown here is ranked 713 out of 720. This is ridiculous. This generation needs to toughen up and be more disciplined. This is not preparing them for college, early classes, nor work, which first shift starts at 7 or 8 a.m. Give me a break. The second lowest rated thought, as you see here, I think students will just go to bed later. There will be no gain in sleep. And finally, changing times is not necessary. It's the way society works. You get up even when you don't want to and go to work and school. So those were ranked 713, 716, and 718 out of 720.
And just in terms of all the thoughts
Yes.
we'll share the links to the entire thing.
Yes.
Some of the ones that get rated very low might be like a partial thought that someone didn't finish and hit send, so it didn't really get rated very
Yeah.
highly. These are the ones that had some substance to them that were near the bottom of the list.
Thank you, Dr. Sawyer. And top thoughts from staff feedback, ranked number 1 of 346, 1, 2, and 3. This will greatly impact staff and their ability to care for their own families. Our own children will follow a totally different schedule. Secondly, how will this impact families whose older children help out after school for caring for younger siblings? Childcare is expensive. And ranked 3rd, later start time means later end time, which could affect staff schedules. Some staff aren't fortunate enough to have one job to support themselves and have 2 jobs. So a change in times mean it affects other jobs that they have. And the lowest rated ranked 339, 340, and 341 of 346. Better attendance for staff if they have extra time to sleep in the morning. Another lowest rated thought, yes, let's move to a later start time. We've known all of the information presented for years, and it's about time that we put students in classrooms at times when they are most alert. And finally, change school start time by 15 to 20 minutes. Older students are more involved in extracurricular activities along with school and work. And here, the next 3 slides illustrate both polarized opinions and opinions viewed in common or showing a high degree of similarity. So as you see side A, you can see the polarization, the 4.5 and 4.8 and 1.8 in the first comment, and I can go through them, and the one just below it, 4.6 being the highest rated, 1.0 being the lowest, and all the way to side B. So starting with side A, postponing start time 1 hour to 8:30. This will give students an extra hour of sleep, bringing it from 7 hours of sleep to 8, the recommendation. And just below that on side A, receiving 878 favorables. The high school times and middle school, elementary school times should be switched. I've seen that the younger the people around me are, the more energy they have during the day. That extra sleep for older kids could be very helpful. If we go way over to the B, the green, I don't want them to change it. I think this because we will still all be tired and we will have less time after school. So we have 1.9 and 5 for the blue and 5.0 on the green side. Won't fix anything. Kids just need to learn how to manage their sleep better. And then in the middle, those in common, two here that we're highlighting the top. I think maybe limiting homework for each day would be a better solution to students' sleep deprivation. Most of the time, students stay up for late hours due to schoolwork. Therefore, less homework means more sleep. And the next comment, students don't get a break. Students get 2 hours worth of homework and 6 hours of school on the weekends instead of having a break. Teachers pile on the pressure with more work. Did I explain that sufficiently, Dr. Okay, and then
And just to be clear, that was for students. So these are, the students who
Right.
ranked, one high and one low, and vice versa. Those
Correct.
spots in the middle were the ones that the same students
Yes.
had common ground on in terms of ranking them highly.
And looking at it the same way, but from the parent perspective, you can see side A, I would strongly prefer my high school students start school at a later time. He sometimes doesn't get enough sleep with the current schedule. Additionally, side A with 335 there, I think it's a good idea for older students as they can get some more sleep and be more active during the day. It's important as we see the kids are under a lot of stress, and it's important to change the start time so they come well rested and alert to school. And if you go over to side B, again, this is from the parent caretaker's perspective. No, because if school starts late, they will sleep late. And secondly, I doubt it will promote more sleep. Students will come home from school or practices later, start evening routines later, and then go to sleep later. And finally, in the middle, sides A and B in common, it's scientifically proven that getting enough sleep is a critical component to overall good health. Children develop lifelong habits now, so they should be provided every opportunity to form healthy ones, like prioritizing sleep. And finally, elementary start time is late enough. Going in any later than 9 is not ideal, and to extend the dismissal time would be even worse. The bus doesn't get some children home until past 4. And then finally from staff, side A, make the change this coming year. SPS has put this important health enhancing choice off for far too long. Announce this winter so families can plan. We need this change and we need it soon so families can plan. Pushing it off just delays the changes we all need to make. And it's important for teens to get enough sleep, and a late start time would help them do so. Side B from staff, given the demands of student schedules balancing with schoolwork, sport or club activities, and personal jobs, students may still continue to struggle. Students will still have the same amount of tasks to accomplish. Starting later would mean getting home later to begin all their tasks. and time should remain the same. Many students have after-school activities that would be negatively affected and vital jobs to support the household. And in common thoughts from staff members, later start times mean later end times, which could affect staff schedules. Some staff aren't fortunate enough to have one job and they have two jobs. A change in times means it affects other jobs they have. And a question, how will this impact families whose older children help out after school for care for younger siblings? Childcare is expensive. Finally, the overarching themes. Many respondents indicated agreement that sleep is essential to mental and physical well-being, and that they perceive that students are better able to focus and are more equipped to learn when they have adequate sleep. Many respondents believe that high school students are currently not getting enough sleep due to a multitude of responsibilities, including homework, athletics, clubs, and activities, care of family members, and employment. The ranking of thoughts indicated that both students and parents support later school start time for adolescents, while thoughts ranked as most important by staff focused on concerns about schedule changes and childcare. And finally, the feedback from this exchange was highly informative, and both potential benefits and potential challenges are being carefully considered by the Sleep Health Advisory Committee as it works on recommendations for potential changes to school start times. And that is that.
Great.
Do we have any?
Thank
Do you have any questions?
Yeah. Colleagues, any questions on the feedback committee?
Good.
No. I think one of the things that I pull away from this is I'm certainly very appreciative of the number of people who participate in,
Yes.
both students, parents, staff. I mean, about hundreds of people giving us their feedback, so it's an important issue. But this balancing of some comment you said there, Dr. Lazar, was the number of tasks don't go away, and trying to think about what are the things that we as a committee sort of control for the district.
Mhm.
Start times is one, but the other lever that we have on our agenda for this year to talk about is homework and what we're thinking about for homework. And no homework days was talked about just 30 minutes ago as a thing that certainly we're expanding to some degree, or sort of making sure that everyone's following through with that. So as we think about these important issues for everybody, I want to really acknowledge that I thought about this after it went out. If somebody asked me from the staff feeling a little more, I'm not sure if ambivalent is the right word, but a little more concerned, a little more, like, what does this exactly mean?
Mhm.
If someone said to me as a professional, Lindsay, I'm going to change your start and end time, but you didn't tell me any details about what that would look like, I would also say, what do you mean? How? I have a family, I have things to think about, and so can appreciate just the different perspectives of the three groups. They resonate for me. I want to thank you all very, very much. Dr. Story, is there anything else you'd like to add for this?
No, I certainly want to thank everyone who participated. It's a really robust level of participation. I know that our contact with Thought Exchanges continues to comment on both the fact that they hope for higher levels of participation, and we have very high levels of participation, not only in people sharing comments, but also reading through them and actually rating. We ask people to rate 20 to 30, and that's typically like people are rating an average like 26, 27 thoughts, which makes it just that much more of a valid sense. And the way that the program works, it's designed so that people can't game the system, and they can't put duplicate thoughts in over and over again, or rate the same thought again over. The system doesn't allow for that, so it gives us really a good sense of, when someone puts a comment out there, what do other people, who are part of that same stakeholder group feel about the importance of that, or their level of agreement with that, and that's one of the benefits of this program. So I think it gives the larger advisory committee a lot to think about in terms of coming forward, as well as the school committee as you move forward towards making a decision in January. So appreciate everybody who participated, and thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to Sarah in particular. for,
Yes.
uh,
Thank you,
for
Sarah.
working on this.
For MVP.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so the second of 4, practices in other districts. Thank you for being with us this evening.
We just going.
All right. So,
Hi.
if you want to introduce yourselves, that would be great, and then we can go from
Go
there.
ahead.
Hi, I'm Dr. Scott Mulcahy. I'm the principal of Patton School.
I'm Noelle Freeman. I'm the director of school nursing.
And I'm Angie Flynn, the Director of School Counseling at Shrewsbury High School.
So the charge for our task group was to look at practices in other districts regarding sleep health and start times. We identified some districts that made changes to start times and what those changes were. We identified some districts that had considered making a change and done some of the process that we're currently going through, but then decided not to move forward with a change. We identified a couple of districts that made a change and then ended up reverting back to their original start times. And we created a survey that we sent out to administrators, educators, school committee members, and originally we hoped to send the survey to parents, but realized that that could have some unintended consequences for the districts if we were to survey parents in another district. So we got that feedback through conversations or through the responses from the staff in those districts, tried to kind of get some information about how parents reacted to the change. So we asked through the survey for feedback on their process, the changes that they made or considered, and any challenges that they faced. So this just shows the districts that we did reach out to with the survey. So districts that changed their start times were Westboro, Northborough and Southborough, Marlborough, Newton, and Ashland, Massachusetts, and then Barrington, Rhode Island. And that represented about 65% of the districts that we reached out to. Districts that researched but then did not move forward with the change include Grafton, Franklin, and Hamden, Connecticut. So that's about 35%. And then we identified 2 districts that changed their start times and then reverted back to their original times. Those being Newport, Rhode Island, and Norwalk, Connecticut. And we were able to get some information from Norwalk about kind of how that played out. So we'll share a little bit more about that. So as you can see, we talked to people with different roles within each school district. The largest group is represented here as administrators, but we weren't exactly clear about who was or wasn't considered an administrator, so that group includes principals and directors that we reached out to in our job-alike positions in other districts. And then some other educators and staff and school committee members from other districts. And then, then just the other graph shows what the distribution of those people's level in the district as far as middle school, high school, or elementary or district-wide. So it was somewhat evenly dispersed. We got some feedback from all the different levels. And then this is just a chart that shows what people's start times were before the change and after the change that they made. So just kind of in summary, the elementary start times for most districts were between 8 a.m. and 8:50 a.m. So they were starting the latest before the changes. And after the changes, they were between 7:45 and 9:10. So most of the districts kept their elementary at the later start time, with a few starting earlier than the other grades. Middle school start times before changes were somewhere between 7:30 and 8:30. And then after changes, they were between 7:45 and 8:40. So most of those ended up after the change being the earliest start time in the district for middle school, with a few of them being the same as the high school. They had the ability to have high school and middle school start at the same time. And then high school start times Before changes were between 7:20 and 7:45, and then after changes, they were between 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock. So again, the high school flipped to being the latest or equal to middle school in other districts.
So in our survey, we asked districts what the positive outcomes were and the negative outcomes for districts that changed their start times. The positive outcomes really were related to student mental health and well-being, and students were reported to be well-rested, more engaged and focused and alert. The negative outcomes due to the change start time really were more around logistics, busing, childcare, after-school activities, athletics, that sort of thing. And then we did get a few responses from districts in regards to what their families and student reactions were. Generally, there were positive responses. The one thing that was very clear was there was a need to be open and transparent about the communication and the plan going forward. And again, the biggest concern was really related to childcare, after-school activities, athletics, etc. So the communication methods used in these other districts really was a broad range of different surveys. So at the district level, very much like what we're doing, there was superintendents, a committee, a school committee, focus groups. There were surveys and communication at each building level through the building administrators and principals. There were public forums, as I said, surveys, and then everything was shared out through formal presentations and social media. And then the themes from districts that did not adopt the change, basically most of those revolved around busing costs and logistics, financial impact on families, and then the impact on athletics and extracurricular activities. And also there were a few districts that also talked about how it was in the middle of COVID, so that kind of impacted their planning as well.
One of our members, Shane Quintard, he was able to contact Norwalk, Connecticut and talk to their district leadership to examine what happened there. What happened in Norwalk is that they went through the process of researching, then they ended up deciding upon the change and reverted back within a month. So we thought that was a unique case study to examine their action steps and how it related to Shrewsbury, give us kind of a path moving forward and to reflect on. Some of the similarities when it comes to Norwalk, Connecticut and ourselves is that we are both trying to gather as much stakeholder feedback as possible. I think Dr. Sawyer referred to before about having thought exchange, and it provides us with a very unique perspective that other districts may not have had or could have utilized. And then there's also the logistical reviews when it comes to our logistics group looking at transportation, athletics, and other co-curricular activities that could be affected by the change, and examining how those impacts could affect the different stakeholders within the groups. When it comes to the differences, and some key differences between Norwalk, Connecticut and ourselves, is number one, when it comes to the diversity within the committees advising the superintendent, particularly related to the stakeholders. So for Norwalk, it was entirely made up of administrators and faculty, whereas if you get a sense here, it's students, it's parents, it's community members, and so there's a wide range of opinions that are within our committee that are providing that feedback, that guide. Also, in terms of the length between the start time of the analysis implementation, Norwalk's plan, they started researching in the fall of 2018. They made a decision to adopt the change in June of 2019, but then waited a full year before they actually did the start time change. So they didn't start until the fall of 2020. They thought this would give them a better sense in terms of working through some of those logistics, but then also giving time for other stakeholders to figure out their plans and their action steps, especially when it came to athletics. There's a lot of parallels too when it comes to Shrewsbury and Norwalk. Number one, I think when it comes to our focus here is that we're looking at students' mental health and well-being as our biggest concern and why we're going to be adopting the change. And that's a big factor when it comes to our decision-making process. And then we also have those similar concerns that our literature groups are looking at when it comes to transportation, the server group in terms of its impact on staff, and also the scheduling when it comes to the extracurricular activities, our co-curricular activities. So we're getting input from our athletic director and other stakeholders. And so with this, I think there's some factors that led to the start time reversal when it came to Norwalk. What they found is that they surveyed 79% of, they surveyed students and families, and 79% of students and families responded. And 62% of students wanted to return back to the 7:30 start time, and 67% of families wanted to revert back to the 7:30 start time. And why did that happen? Well, faculty were unhappy with the new schedule and that schedule change, but I think a lot of it had to do with the transportation issues. If you look at Norwalk, Connecticut, it's close to Long Island Sound, and because of that, there's a lot more congestion with the later start time that did affect not only staff, but then also students and their schedules. So what started to happen was not only were the staff having to deal with long commutes, but then you also had students coming to school later because of that additional traffic, which resulted in the loss of educational time and instruction. So it was determined that they should revert back again within a month of starting. There are some critical components to a successful start time change that Norwalk alluded to. Number one, it's all about stakeholder buy-in, about getting as much feedback as possible from your stakeholders, which is going to be a critical part to our success if we do decide to adopt the change. Also, the examination of transportation logistics, as I mentioned before, Newark does have that unique piece when it comes to being close to Long Island Sound and having those additional constraints when it comes to transportation that we might have to deal with. But whether moving start time forward or backwards for different groups, it will impact traffic in some way. And then it's really important for communication, that open, transparent communication throughout the entire district and across multiple mediums. So it's not just the surveys, but through public forums and different ways to get stakeholder feedback. So some of the conclusions that we were able to grasp from our surveys and our reaching out to the other districts is that when it came to districts that made that start change, it was in large part very positive, especially when you consider the impact when it comes to student mental health and well-being. Students were getting more alert, more engaged, more prepared for class. And this is what the high school students respond to when it came to the administrators reaching out to them for their feedback. There is that adjustment period for all community members, I think, whenever you adopt change, and that was definitely apparent when we were surveying the different stakeholders from our groups. But again, when the change was adopted, even those groups that necessarily didn't agree with it at first found it to be more favorable. Some of the concerns that still lingered and were consideration for those districts that did not adopt the change, again, were the logistics when it comes to busing costs, the financial impact when it comes to childcare, and there's also that piece of the co-curricular activities and how it affects students. But how I would like to end is that when it comes to the change, that a successful implementation is all about communication and getting stakeholder involvement and feedback in multiple means.
Thank you very, very much. Again, an awful lot of effort. Thank you for all of that. Colleagues, questions or thoughts? Please, Jason.
Just a question on the Norwalk example. I know that they made their quick decision to revert in the fall of 2020, which obviously it strikes me fall of 2020 was near the height of COVID. To decide to adjust start times again after only a few weeks seems like an extreme decision, but I'm wondering what role the pandemic might have played in that. Obviously in the fall of 2020, school didn't look anything like it normally did. Did that factor into their thinking that they could snap back so quickly?
So Shane was the one who talked to Norwalk, and so he's enjoying Florida right now. We could definitely reach out to him at some point and answer that question for you.
I would be curious to know. Thank you.
Yeah. Please.
I had the pleasure of working with this task group during this, and I think I just wanted to make the comment that I was struck when beginning this work at how the surrounding school districts had already adopted this change, which I wasn't aware of, that Westboro and Northboro and Southboro had already made some adjustments to start times. So I just thought that's something that, I really wasn't aware of before I began this work. And, we're not really at the forefront here doing this. It's been, other districts have been adopting this in, the past, 5-10 years. So
it became very apparent when we started doing initial research was that the majority of school districts that started to research the change, adopted the change.
I just want to say how much I appreciate the inclusion both of those who made the change and those who did not, and that the logistics and the hurdles to overcome are non-trivial and important, and really impact families and staff in really important ways. So thanks for being representative. As we could have just talked to those who did it and seen what's happened, but making sure we're hearing from sort of all the voices, and of course the example of big changes and going back on big changes. I don't think anyone would like to be in that position. That we don't have enough community support. It seems like that was really important in Norwalk. So, Dr. Sawyer, anything you'd like to add?
I just want to thank the group as well. It's a lot of rolling up their sleeves and doing a lot of work, and phone calls and emails and reaching out to different folks in these districts, and to get that perspective from folks who've already been there. It makes a lot of sense that we can learn from their experiences, and this group is enabling us to do that, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Childcare.
Here we are.
Yes.
All right, so our task group convened to address childcare related concerns that might arise from this discussion. We know that childcare is a topic that has the potential to affect both the staff as well as district families. So the purpose of the childcare task group was to gather information regarding how childcare needs of families and school staff may be impacted by any potential changes in school start times for the different age spans. Okay. So how we did this was we spoke with Karen Isaacson, who's the director of the Extended School Care Program for SPS, to gather some information regarding the before and after school programs offered here. Additionally, we gathered information from licensed childcare providers, both here in our community as well as neighboring communities. We referenced, we were looking up several childcare websites as well as their business Facebook pages to gather information regarding enrollment status, their hours of operation, as well as lead time that might be needed in order to notify providers of schedule changes. All right. So we used email and telephone to contact about 260 childcare providers in 12 towns, and we received 58 responses from that pool. We looked at center-based care, family daycare, preschool and kindergarten programs, as well as before and after school programs. So let's talk about the extended school care program, which is offered here in Shrewsbury. And historically, this has been a really popular program. In the years prior to COVID, there were consistently wait lists, especially for the afternoon care. And it was interesting to find that when we spoke with Karen Isaacson, that currently the enrollment is down. Since COVID, there have been openings, and there currently are openings at all the schools for both morning and afternoon care, at all the schools with the exception of Beale afternoon care. And this sort of raised the question for us of who is watching, who's caring for these children after school now if they're no longer enrolled in extended day. We hypothesized that it's likely parents and caregivers who have more flexible schedules, who might be working remotely. And then we also wonder about how many older siblings are watching their younger siblings. Okay. So with the surveyed child care providers, in terms of current enrollment, if we called them up now and asked, do you have an opening for a child immediately, 34% said, yes, we do. About 50% said, no, we don't. There's a wait list. And then a smaller percentage, about 16%, said that, well, there might be one or two. It depends on the age group. So There were more openings for preschool and school-age children, and it was harder to find openings immediately for infants and toddlers, but with extended time it might be possible. It's just harder. We also asked them about enrollment for fall 2023. And at this point, about 74% of those providers said that they do have openings if you enroll early. They expect that as you get closer to that fall 2023 date, there will be fewer openings, but currently there are a good number. 20% said there's a limited number, and then 6% were already on wait list. Of note, some preschools do begin enrolling as early as right now for next year. Usually enrollment begins between now and, say, February, and then they continue through.
Thanks, Sarah. So we took a look at the hours of operation for the child care centers, and you'll see that most of them, about 76%, were open before 8 a.m., which is helpful to our staff. And a few, which were about 10%, open as early as 6 or 6:30 a.m. Then for childcare closing times, most of them, about 77% of the childcare providers will close at 5 p.m. or later, which broke down to 55% of them closing between 5 and 5:30, and 22% between 5:45 and 6 o'clock p.m. 23% of the childcare providers closed before 5. And these tended to be the family daycares and preschool and kindergarten programs. Generally, we found that child care providers were trying to meet the increasing caregiver need for early opening and later closing times. We were concerned about the lead time that was going to be needed for changes to childcare. Taking a look at that, this is what would require a family to notify in advance to their child care provider to make changes to that child's schedule. Once enrolled, the lead time for pickup and drop-off changes tended to be about 0 to 48 hours. So that was pretty short notice. Most extended day programs appear to be pretty flexible with changes once the child's already enrolled in the program. Providers often require more time, which could be 14 to 30 days, to add or subtract days to a child's weekly schedule or to withdraw from a program. And in general, preschool kindergarten programs are less flexible with schedule changes due to specific program start and end times. This really beautifully dense chart for you with a little bit of information. So the left-hand side, we took a look at some of the models that are in other districts and kind of organized our thoughts around that. So some potential hypothetical scenarios are listed out there. One would be maintaining current order, but shifting the start times later for all 3 groups of high school, middle school, elementary school. The second one down there is shifting times later and changing the order slightly, as some districts do, from middle school starting first, then high school, then elementary. The third one's shift times later and change our order. So reversing to elementary, then middle, then high school. And the bottom row is the shift times later and change the order from elementary, then high school, then middle school. So it's a wide variety of options that are out there. And then going across the top, there's a section there for district families from elementary, middle school, and high school and how it would impact them. And then towards the right is Shrewsbury Public Schools staff and who work in elementary, middle, and high school. So there's a lot of information here. I'd encourage you to look at it on paper. But really looking at how different types of changes impact different groups. So both the families of our students and also our staff. That might be a great place for some questions later. All right, so we had a lot of factors to consider, including availability of older siblings to take care of younger siblings after school. So that might be middle school students or high school students, or also families' reliance on older siblings to provide care or transportation to the younger siblings in the morning. The impact on our extended school programming and extended school employee hours. For example, our need to add or subtract morning programs or lengthen and shorten afternoon programs. The length of time at school for children attending school and then the extended day program after that. The fourth one was the impact of financial costs of childcare, which we saw as some of the concerns on the thought exchange. And fifth was possible effect of dismissal times on the presence of middle schoolers in the center of town. In summary, Childcare is a really important and complex issue. As you saw from that beautiful chart, there are so many factors that impact families in different ways, that impact parents who are at various grade levels, and then also staff at all different grade levels. So we took a look at, and we really need to consider how the end times might change, and if it's presumed that childcare needs for some of our staff and student families will change. The potential childcare impact to families and staff will be different for each age span as it is currently. These are all concerns that we face a little bit differently. The impact might also be affected by each family's own unique situations and their priorities, attitudes, and preferences. And there are many options that families of our students and staff already use and may consider deciding on what's best for their own family. This task group is still considering the efficacy of administering further surveys, we know you love them, of our stakeholders' perspectives in order to gain some more detailed insights on how changes in school schedules might affect sibling care in homes, staff child care needs, and staff availability outside of the regularly scheduled school day.
Thank you. I realized I failed to ask you to introduce yourselves before you started, and maybe just your whether you're a parent, what can I?
Sure.
Please.
Sarah Russell, parent. I have a high schooler and an elementary school student.
And I'm Guinevere Molina. I am a first grade teacher at BL, and I also have 3 kids in district who've been here since preschool. So they're now at Sherwood, Oak, and the high school. So we span all 4 grade levels in my house at 4 different schools.
And colleagues, questions about childcare? Seems complex. The chart you made, the complex chart, can we go back to that just real quick, Dr. Sawyer? Question about, okay, so on the top you have district families and SPS staff. When an SPS staff person also lives in district, where would they fall in your thinking here, right? If they are a staff person, but their kids are also, going to our schools versus obviously a family who lives in the Holden staff member, and for which kids, where would they be? Which to the right or the left? Where would you think about them? Or
I mean, I don't wear one hat. I always wear both at the same time. And I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
And that's when we got to, it's so specific for different families.
Right.
So are there 2 adults in the home? Are they working from home? Are they, it could vary in so many different ways. And then all the grade levels that we teach and our children are at in different stages of life. As my 3 kids just stepped up into 3 new schools and different buses, different start times. So that's constantly happening for our families, that we are changing every 4 to 5 years. We're making changes in when we wake up and make lunches or not. So I think that there's a lot of change as a parent for staff. Kind of start with one time and you anticipate that that's your work schedule. You alluded to that, Ms. Heffernan. We're not maybe anticipating that as much. I think that's why we're trying to do all this work ahead of time and really think out how that impacts people. Our high school families, high school staff get to work extremely early and need really early childcare, but then they're done really early. So making changes for any of our schedules, I think, really considering people who are dual, who are both staff and parents in district, it's really looking at both sets of considerations. Did that help?
Yes.
I basically just said it's super complicated and more complicated in that case.
That's quite all right. That is what it is. Dr. Sawyer, anything you'd like to add here? Can I have one more thing? I just realized 260 providers is an awful lot of providers. So thank you for reaching out to them. I didn't even know there were 260 providers in our greater catchment area. So that is just commendable, and I'm thankful for the nearly 60 that took the time to respond as well. Sorry, go ahead.
No, and I appreciated that, and I think that the information that there is availability in many cases and on not too long of a notice, but obviously if you don't require it to get new child care, especially for infants or toddlers, is more of a challenge for sure, and that's just another reason why having 9 or so months of lead time is important in terms of people's planning. And just to be clear, when we do administer the survey in December after the full advisory committee presents some recommended options to the school committee, we'll be sure to be asking people about how those different options might affect their child care situation and in some fashion, so that we can get as clear a picture as we can, with the understanding that, as both Gwen and Sarah have indicated, there are so many variables that it's going to affect people differently. And obviously, whether it's a school department employee, whether it's a family who's employed in a different capacity, families with, especially families with 2 working parents or a single parent who's working, it's complicated, and there's all different kinds of permutations of people who have access to family locally or private family daycare versus using more of a daycare business. There's just so many different flavors of it. We know that it's going to affect people, just as it does now. So the question is, it's a change piece that is part of this. So again, thank you for all the work, and there was a lot of legwork done by this group, and we really appreciate the information that they uncovered.
Thank you both very much for your time this evening.
Thank you.
That's for you. All right.
You're in front of us too much. We don't have a name tag for you.
That's right.
Do you mind doing an introductions before we begin?
Sure. Pat Collins, Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations.
Jennifer Parshall, a parent of 2, and sometimes in my spare time an engineer and also a BLPTO mom.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to cover from our logistics task group. You've heard a lot about logistics and busing as well, so we're going to kind of unpack some of this for you and for community members who are watching this evening. We're going to talk about some of the bus system basics, cost factors, current challenges in the system that we have right now, present day, that we think ought to be remedied as part of this potential change. Key success factors if start times do change, considerations for after school and co-curricular programs like athletics, clubs, and theater. Some of these things are overlapping, of course, from your prior reports, and then some just basic principles informing potential options. So first and foremost is, how does our bus system work, or busing 101? And it might be not so obvious to folks whose interaction with the bus system is really just seeing their child get on a big yellow bus and ride off for the day and then be dropped off, and not kind of see beyond that. So this is just some baseline information, and firstly is that the district outsources this service to a vendor, AA Transportation, which is headquartered right here in Shrewsbury, which is very fortunate. We are operating a fleet of 48 buses on a daily basis. 38 of those buses are dedicated towards regular education and private school busing. So the public school districts have a requirement to also transport resident students to Department of Ed approved private schools. And then we have 6 buses dedicated towards special education and 2 buses dedicated towards transporting high school students to Assabet Valley Regional Technical High School located in Marlborough, Mass. So that's your 48 buses. We operate a 3-tier system, and most districts do this as well. And so it's really kind of to maximize that asset and that driver and cost, if you will. And so generally, each of those 48 buses that I mentioned just earlier have 3 morning commitments and 3 afternoon commitments. And this is kind of a typical scheme that most public school districts engage in. So an example of this is shown here, just using, for example, 2 different buses, bus number 1 and bus number 8. Before I get into that piece is that all of these 48 buses combined with morning some midday preschool runs, and then afternoon runs. We're running 247 bus routes, basically. So, for example, bus number 1, and some of those listening might be on bus number 1, or their students, they have a Tier 1 commitment, which is the high school. And right after dropping off those students, bus number 1 starts up their Tier 2 commitment, which is to pick up and deliver students to Sherwood and Oak Middle Schools. And then bus number 1 may have a bit of a pause because of the difference in start time right now between the middle schools and the start time of elementaries. So you'll sometimes see buses parked temporarily, say at the center of town at the old Beale School parking lot, or down at White City at Shaw's, and they're kind of just waiting because they can't yet start their elementary route. It would be too early. So there's a little bit of pause there. And then so bus number 1 will then segue into their third and final morning commitment, picking up children for Floral Street School. And then in the afternoon, that system just kind of plays out again in the same sequence. But the difference is in the afternoon, there's no pause between Tier 2 and Tier 3 because of the differing lengths of school day, which Jen will get into a little bit later. So it's an immediate turnaround between high school and middle school, and an immediate turnaround between Oak and Floral in the afternoon. And then bus number 8 does the same thing. The Assabet bus that I showed here only has 1 commitment because we're running 2 buses for Assabet to cover the entire geography of the town of Shrewsbury, and pick up all of those kids. They're much longer routes, and then drive out to Marlborough, up 140 to 290, down to the end, and drop them off at Assabet in time for school start. It's there. So, moving on to ridership. You have just over 4,000 riders for Shrewsbury schools, 200 riders for private, 4,328 total. Those are registered riders, of course. We also get, students are, might be riding, certain days of the week, or if you're a high school athlete, you might not be riding the afternoon bus in the fall, but you take it in the winter and the spring. So these are registered riders, but if all of them were to ride the bus every day, twice a day, that would be over 9,600 different student bus trips, if you will, or on an annual basis, 1.7 million bus trips if that were to be at full ridership. You can see the percentage of riders based upon the school enrollment varies by school. So we're about 60% at the high school in terms of registered riders. The largest percentages, of course, at the middle schools, you can see it's just about 77 and 82%. And then the elementaries kind of vary based upon the density of the housing in terms of the school and walkability routes and what have you. So Beale has the highest ridership at almost 74%. That's a huge district, right, that covers the north western part of town, some central, and then down into a portion of the central south part of town. So we got the highest bus ridership there, and then the smallest in terms of elementary schools is Patton at 50%, and we've got a lot of walking paths and sidewalks there to get to Patton School. Parker at 24% is really, we only bus students with specialized transportation in their individual education plan, or special education students. So students who are paying tuition are not eligible for busing. So you got a low percentage there. So moving on to cost, what is the order of magnitude of transportation? It's 5% of our overall appropriation. You can see, the biggest portion, of course, is salaries, but the next kind of combined biggest part is transportation between special ed and regular ed transportation, $4.2 million. So it's no small consideration. The next slide talks about transportation costs, and so what does it cost for to operate one of those 48 buses on an annual basis? Well, the cost is $80,752 this fiscal year, based upon our contract with AA Transportation. What does that cover? All of these things. It covers the big yellow bus asset, covers the driver and all the wages and employee benefits, covers all the insurance that AA Transportation has to carry, liability insurance, automobile insurance, cost of all the fuel, maintenance of the vehicles. It's an all-in cost. We don't pay anything else for busing. We pay a flat per diem rate that basically amounts to, on an annual basis, just under $81,000. So it's not an inexpensive aspect of our school department operations. So the question that some have posed is, geez, why don't you just kind of just simplify this thing, and instead of running 3 tiers, just run 2, right? And move everybody a little bit later, and obviously you would need many, many more bus assets at the same time in order to affect that, and it would just be cost prohibitive. And that's why other school districts, many others, have not done that either. But again, some districts might be able to do that if they're very small districts, if they have smaller geography to cover, depending on the locations of their schools. Different circumstances will dictate different outcomes, but for us, it would just be cost prohibitive to move to 2 tiers. And then, what if, the question is, what if we wanted to shrink some of that time between the tiers and kind of play around with the start and end times a bit. And so if we were to, say, add 5 buses to kind of shrink some of those tier times, and next year's cost, I'm just projecting based upon inflation rates that the busing rate might be around approximately $87,000. We don't have a contract yet. But 5 buses at $87,000 would be an additional $435,000 next year. And so if you were to just carry that out at a flat rate without any further inflation, you're talking over $4.3 million over 10 years. So again, no small consideration, and really the reason why some districts and communities get halted along the way in terms of this research project, despite all the merits that have been talked about previously. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Jen to talk about some other aspects.
Exactly. As part of the logistics group, one of the first things we did was we took a moment to review the current schedule to see what we could learn from this schedule and what pluses and minuses are already in our system. Because if we are going to suggest new options, we want to potentially improve upon things. This is just a refresher of start times for everyone. And the interesting 2 columns are over on the right, the school day, length of day, and the time between the tiers. Length of day is something I didn't realize was different between the different school categories. It varies from 6 hours and 15 minutes up to 6 hours and 35 minutes. Also, the time between the tiers, meaning the time available for buses to go from the first commitment to the second commitment, is shown in that last column. And as we can see, I'll give you a hint that the red is bad. As we get into our next slides, that's not enough time. And that leads to what we've called within our group, I guess, not truth in advertising. And it leads to very early pickups for the high school students. So we can go to the next slide. As we said, we've got the 3 tiers for busing. The high school is currently first, and then there's Sherwood and Oak, and then we go to elementary. Each tier has a slightly different length of student day, which provides its own set of challenges when scheduling buses. For example, where there was 60 minutes in the morning between middle school and elementary school runs, because there's a different length of day between those 2 groups, it gets reduced down to 40 minutes. So what the message is the different length of student day makes it more challenging to schedule buses. And also, there is currently insufficient time between the tiers to allow the buses to make their routes. In particular, it's between the high school and middle school tiers. That 25 minutes in the morning is insufficient to allow a bus to leave the high school and then make it through their middle school route to get to the middle schools for 8 a.m. So that's where we don't really have the truth in advertising. That's where we see some high school students picked up almost an hour before the high school start time. So this is something that the logistics group looked at and felt that was a challenge in our current system, and any recommendations for a potential change down the road, these would be addressed. So, also, we had some considerations for the after-school athletics, the clubs, theaters, and other activities. We had our athletic director, Jay Costa, was kind and surveyed the other athletic departments in nearby districts that have later high school start times, both in our league and outside our league, to gain their insights. You can see the districts that were reached out to there. And the take-home message from the athletics department, and this will hold true for all of the other co-curriculars as well, is that shifting high school times later, the later you go, the higher the likelihood of conflicts and obstacles with scheduling. And then if we go to the next slide, this is surveys. So this is from feedback from other districts that have made the change to later start times. One of the comments was very telling, that first one, is there's the potential need to provide some early dismissals from academic classes for athletes to be able to make their away competitions. They were finding in the other districts that there's an increased travel time if it's going to be later in the day, later in the afternoon, to get to away games. And there's also the potential, there were scheduling conflicts with less available times for off-site venues for things like swimming or ice hockey, gymnastics. Just there'd be conflicts with adult groups or other youth groups looking to use the same facilities later in the afternoon or in the evenings. Next slide. And so some of the results of shifting high school start times later was more practices and games moved to weekends. Some coaches who were also teachers decided that they could not continue to coach because the later practice and game times pushed the coaching commitment too late in the evening for them. And it also prevented some athletes from also participating in after-school clubs because of the lack of time between things. So, the logistics group thought about those and came up with some key success factors for forming potential options for your consideration. One of the first things that we felt was to improve upon the busing was to be able to provide at least 40 minutes between the tiers. So there would no longer be that 25-minute between and one start time and the next start time. Also, we want to equalize, or at least suggest equalizing the student day to simplify operations and to be able to maintain that 40 minutes between the tiers for the busing, which we saw in the earlier example, the 60 minutes between middle school and elementary shrunk to 40 minutes in the afternoon on pickups because of different length of student day. There's the current length. There's 20 minutes difference between all the three groups. And I do want to point out a comment on that. When we talk about current length of day, we have no intention of reducing any instructional time a student would receive. And third, we wanted to minimize or eliminate any new dollars that would go into busing. We wanted to maintain using the 3-tiered system, and we didn't want to potentially take away from dollars that could go into the classrooms. Let's see. All right, also for the principles for forming options, so to achieve the maximum efficiency, we are going to assume the general pattern of 3 tiers to avoid any major costs, to standardize the length of day across all schools. The work day for the high school and middle school staff would continue to be the 7 hours and 10 minutes it is currently. However, in looking at standardizing the length of day, that may require a change in the current length of day of elementary teachers from 7 hours to 7 hours and 10 minutes. And to provide 40 minutes between each tier to give the buses time to get where they need to go. And then also 2 other wish list items we had when looking at options is to avoid having the high school get out too late for the after-school activities, which is key, which we saw. And to also to avoid having elementary students waiting for the bus or getting dropped off in the dark. Just for reminders, the sunrise in late December and early January is 7:15, and some sunsets are at 4:15. And so this is where I say, please come back in 2 weeks, and there will be specific options that will be presented by the full report from the Sleep Health Committee on December 14th. And thus far, we have developed 11 different alternatives, some with minor differences, and some with, I guess that leaves the question, some with minor differences. I'll just step there and say, does anyone have any questions?
Thank you very much. Colleagues, questions for the logistics task group? No?
Good.
Okay. No? I had the pleasure of being one of the members of the logistics task group, so they've heard all of my questions already, and I've had many chances to vet those. Dr. Sawyer, what if anything would you like to add here?
I think it's important, and sometimes people don't recognize what some of the complexities are in terms of transporting kids to and from school, schedules related to the school day, related to co-curricular activities, a variety of things. And those are activities we run that are co-curricular. Those are activities that families have their kids participate in that aren't part of our schools, but maybe scouts or dance or whatever it might be that their children might participate in. One thing that came up certainly in the thought exchange that was mentioned, students who are of high school age who work. These are all things that we're going to be considering very carefully, that the committee will, in terms of formulating any options to bring forward to the school committee. One thing that I do want to be really clear about when we talk about the educator work day, that is the amount of time that they're required to be on campus. I don't want anyone to have the illusion that they start their work and end their work in that 7-hour span, because there are many hours outside of that span the teachers are planning lessons, grading papers, contacting parents, whatever it is they might do. There are some, certainly in my experience in Shrewsbury, depending on where that educator is in their life, sometimes there will be some who come early before school and leave not long after the students are dismissed when they're able to leave. Some the opposite. Some might be there a lot of times. They like to do their work in their classroom space. Others, because they might have children they have to get from their own school or daycare or something, may leave when they're able, and then they'll do work from home on their own time beyond that. So it shouldn't be confused with somehow our educators can do the job expected of them just within that time period. That's the time they're required to be on campus in order for the school to operate effectively and students to be supervised during arrival and dismissal. And of course, with extra help and all the other things that our teachers do for our students, because they're an incredibly dedicated group of professionals. Our other staff, paraprofessionals, work on a slightly different schedule that might vary from school to school, level to level. But obviously, this whole endeavor, when you change schedules for something that families revolve around, or whether it's your child's going to school or whether you're an employee of the school district, obviously there are going to be impacts if shifts are made. And that's something that, again, the committee is being very thoughtful about as they develop any recommendations they have. But I appreciate all the work the logistics group has done, and I think it's very helpful information for the school committee to have, for the public to be aware of, and all of our stakeholders as we work through this particular question.
Yeah, and I just want to thank you, and I think there are 31 members of the Sleep Health Advisory Task Force who are staff, who are parents. We have multiple high school students participating, so it's just an incredibly great group, and it's putting an awful lot of time. And we'll stay tuned and see you back here in a few weeks. But thank you very much for your time this evening. Okay. Our next item on the agenda is in Finance and Operations, and it is our fiscal year 2023 budget update. Mr. Collins, glad to have you stay with us here to present an update on the status of our current fiscal year 2023 budget. We did receive an enclosed report with a one-page sort of high-level summary of our 19 reportable budget categories. And so, Mr. Collins, I will turn it over to you.
Sure. Sounds like fewer people interested in this topic.
Have a good night.
Understandable. All right. Get some sleep. So I'm going to provide an overview on a couple financial areas. One is just the overall town appropriated budget, town meeting appropriated budget. I do want to touch upon COVID funding a bit, and then circuit breaker funding as well. As a reminder that this current fiscal year, 2023, our overall town appropriation was $79,318,971. It was a 4.75% increase over fiscal 22, and we're effectively in year 2 of the override agreement, which caps our overall budget increase on an annual basis, and that's the agreement between the Board of Selectmen, of course, and yourselves, and which is a commitment to the community to have this override function for a minimum number of years, for specifically a minimum of 4 and hopefully more years than that. So, we're in the early part of the fiscal year, and with respect to the the expenses are the expenses. The projection is a look forward, and it's an early look forward. So, it might be akin to like the 10-day forecast as opposed to the next day forecast. So it's not fact, it's projection at this point. So it will certainly change as we enter into the winter months and into the springtime as well. So I'm going to go over some of those pieces in a minute, but first a quick sidestep in talking about COVID funding and where we're at to keep the committee apprised. Like all other school districts, we received a number of different state and federal funds with respect to COVID, and 3 of the bigger federal funding sources that we're still operating most recently are the so-called ESSER funds, ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3, all separately granted funds to school districts using a certain methodology. And so ESSER 1, and ESSER basically means the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. That's what ESSER is the acronym for. So ESSER 1 was just over $162,000, and we had to spend those funds by this past September 30th, and we did. Those are 100% expended. ESSER 2, just over $557,000. We've expended just over $358,000 of that, or 64%, and we need to expend the remainder of those funds by next September 30th, 2023. This is federal funding, so it's running on the federal fiscal year instead of our state fiscal year schedule. And then finally, ESSER 3, just over $1.2 million allocation, and to date we've expended or encumbered about $547,000 or 44%. And we have availability of those funds out to September 30th of 2024. So we've got about another year and 10 months to expend those funds. So just a couple other closing notes. That there have been, some media reports of what has been an enormous amount of federal funding going to school districts, and some school districts not spending the funds or not having drawn them down. So that is, in fact, one of the points I wanted to make here tonight, is that we are drawing down the funds. We are investing the funds to help our operations and help our students recover from learning loss. And you have a kind of an objective picture of where we stand there. It's also a bit of a preview to, in the future, near future, that we expect to present to the school committee a proposal to amend or change the use of the original plan for ESSER 3, and that was a plan that the school committee had to specifically vote, and ESSER 3 had a lot more strings attached to it than the other two allocations. And so, we're a bit into having received those funds. We've gone through 2 summer academies that Ms. Clowder has run to help students recover some of their learning loss. And we think that we ought to make some pivots in terms of how we're investing those funds. So there'll be a proposal for an amendment coming at an upcoming school committee for you. So that's a little bit about COVID funding. In terms of the general fund, you have the spreadsheet there, which I'm not going to, go over every single piece of this, but the year-to-date actual expenditures of the $79.3 million, year-to-date, fiscal year-to-date, we've expended $21.6 million. We've encumbered another $53.5 million, and not yet encumbered is just over $4 million. I'm projecting right now, as one would, I don't have any real major concerns overall about our budget, and projecting that we're going to fully expend it by next June 30th. There are some of these categories, like every other year, categorically, where we're planning pretty far in advance and from a budgetary perspective, and then we're implementing that there are variances. I'm going to go over some of those variances. First, the administrative category, I'm projecting that we will run about 1.4% over budget there. We had some individual contract renegotiations with market adjustments, and the Unit B contract a little bit higher than budgeted, which accounts for that 1.4% projection. We're running very close on a percentage basis with teachers, our teacher budget, which is the biggest category, budgeted at about $48.7 million. Our paraprofessionals, category A3, at this point, I'm projecting about a 2.6% overage based upon unanticipated move-in students who have high enough needs that, based upon our staff's assessment, need additional paraprofessional support. Embedded in that projection is that also an assumption, like most all projections have, is that we've been running a number of staff vacancies, and so I just projected most conservatively that we'll fulfill all of those vacancies by the day after our holiday break, and that by January 2nd we're going to be fully staffed and remain fully staffed the rest of the year. That's the most conservative approach. That's what kind of leads to that projection. Probably not going to be there, just given the labor market. Substitutes is the biggest area of unanticipated overage, and I'm going to get into some of those more details in just a moment because I want to go into a little bit more detail there. Other areas we're running a little bit under budget on school transportation, both regular ed and special education. We'll see how the rest of the year plays out. Special education tuitions, we're running under budget this year, and I've assumed in that year-end surplus, if you will, that between now and the end of the school year, that the special education department will have placed students who are awaiting placement in their appropriate out-of-district placements to the tune of $300,000. So again, we'll see how that plays out, but that's the assumption underlying that piece there. And then vocational tuitions, we're running under budget just based upon, again, fewer students at the freshman level. And we did have some attrition with upperclassmen as well. And they didn't really make any other projections on the kind of the expenses, the more discretionary stuff that we're going to basically just be on budget there. So the biggest aspect here in terms of substitutes, some of the contributing factors I wrote in the report. A couple of reasons. Certainly COVID itself has continued to contribute to staff absences, both our staff being absent due to COVID, and also our staff with family members, and those staff members needing to take family sick time to. So our day-to-day substitutes are up. We also, because of the lack of substitutes that everybody's been struggling with, and that we struggled with enormously, especially last wintertime, we implemented a program called the Building Sub, which basically said, to some of our more available substitutes that were willing to, that if they were to commit to be a substitute with us for the entire year, and we could rely upon that, and the building principals could rely upon that we'd pay them at a higher rate of $140. And so we have 8 building substitutes right now, and it's worked out very well because you can rely on them, of course, and know that at least you're going to have one, and a consistent one who knows the building and knows the operations and gets to know the kids and the staff. But it's a contributing factor because our daily rate is $100. The other part that's contributed to additional substitutes, us having to get additional substitutes, is the vacancies among the paraprofessional group and not being able to fulfill all those positions. So, some schools have had to hire substitutes just to cover IEPs, and this plays out in a lot of different ways, whether it's the substitute covering, for that student with special needs, or a paraprofessional then covering for the day, and the substitute covering more general duties. There's a lot of different permutations there as well, but so the vacancy rate of paraprofessionals has caused some increased substitute need. And then with respect to long-term substitutes, we've just had more. You had your typical maternity, paternity leaves, medical leaves. We did have 3 late staff resignations that we filled with long-term substitutes. We had one individual who's on a military deployment, long-term military deployment, so we've got a long-term substitute for the rest of the year there. So there's not one reason, there's a multiplicity of reasons to see that we're, our spend rate is on a pathway to put us far over budget for day-to-day and long-term substitutes. And just for context, I put in the box below in your report there a chart that shows the actual expenses for the prior 4 fiscal years for both day-to-day and long-term substitutes. So you can see I'm projecting in the fiscal 19, 20, 21, and 22. Those are actuals. And fiscal 23, of course, is a year-end projection based upon what is, admittedly just a short, basically almost about 2 months of expenses. So we've got, about another 8 months to go. So we'll see how it plays out. So that's where we stand with the appropriated budget. And then just the final topic is that with respect to circuit breaker, we began this fiscal year in the circuit breaker account, which is separate from appropriations, with a fund balance of just over $3.1 million that is not committed. It's an unreserved reserve, or an uncommitted reserve, if you will, and with the very purpose, like other school districts, some our neighbors do the same thing. Basically, Hudson, Millbury, Marlboro all do kind of the same thing, which is you try to accumulate, up to what is the maximum amount of circuit breaker you can keep on account, and then use that amount to budget for your subsequent fiscal year and not have to speculate or project what the state might provide. So it provides you more budget certainty, and in the longer term, and it also in the shorter term provides you more budget stability, so that if this projection changes come wintertime and it looks like we might be without some other assistance running over, then we could access these funds to pay more special education expenses and help us right the ship. So it provides short-term stability, and that's a positive financial practice, again, that other school districts employ as well. So that's where we are with circuit breaker. And finally, of course, I'll continue to monitor the budget and keep the committee apprised of any significant changes along the way.
Thank you very
Sure.
much, Patrick. Any questions or comments that people have? Yeah, please.
I just, thank you very much for the report. I just had one question about the vocational tuitions and why they were, it seemed like 11 upper class students unenrolled between this year and last year. I was just wondering if that was unusual to have that many unenrollments.
Yeah, and I apologize, I mischaracterized that. It's actually 3 students who unenrolled officially. Every year there's attrition. I did look back, and that attrition, has run from, 0 kids to 9 kids. So there's always some attrition. But the 11 kids was really more of about a difference in grade level for grades 11 and 12 from year to year. But we had 3 attritions, not 11 for vocational.
So if I'm understanding it, like the graduating class had more kids in it than the
Yeah.
replacing class. So there was
Right.
some of that was
Right.
a difference from year over year.
Yep.
But we did have 3 kids who
Yes.
actually left the program. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, and anything, and the only note I would make is just sort of the difference in society writ large when I think about substitutes. If you have the sniffles, no one goes to work anymore. Stay home, right? Which we used to think in society. Lots of people would take pride in never having taken a sick day, and now we're saying, please take your sick days and stay home. But that obviously, while appropriate for public health, comes at an expense to need to cover that. And so I wonder, I'd like to hope that we'll level off at some point and we'll start to know what our new normal looks like, about what that might be. But another thing to just percolating for me. But Patrick, thank you very much for the update. Dr. Sawyer, anything else to add on this current fiscal year before we pivot to next fiscal year?
No, I have the utmost confidence in Mr. Collins's familiarity with how the years trend and paying attention to the numbers. And the good news is we're on target, despite some ups and downs in different parts of the budget, and we'll continue to monitor it and manage it closely.
Great. Then I will move us on to our next agenda item, which is moving to next fiscal year's budget, to look at that budget calendar for both review and hopefully for potential vote. And Mr. Collins, I know you provide some more information to us, so I'll turn it back to you one more time.
Okay, thank you. So the budget calendar is basically a one-pager that you have in front of you, and if you're of the mind to get your own personal calendar out and plug some dates at the end of this, then this might be an opportunity, or for later. But this kind of really sets the timeline and hopefully kind of mental framework with where we're going with fiscal 24 budget development. Back in October, of course, the committee undertook the priorities and guidance document, which is an important piece for us to look to as we develop the fiscal 24 budget, is knowing your priorities and your guidance as we develop that. So that was done in October. We're right now in November, we're reviewing the calendar to make sure we have consensus on that, and that also we're plugging into our calendars our commitments upcoming with other town boards, which leads to the next week, December 6th, will be the first joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen in the school committee on the fiscal outlook for fiscal 24. And again, per that override agreement, there's a requirement to have 2 of these per fiscal year, so this would be the first of those 2. And I know Mr. Mizikar is preparing some financial information for everybody to look at for that meeting on next Tuesday. And then the next night, December 7th, school committee budget workshop, along with some other topics as well. And we'll have some preliminary information around the fiscal 24 budget as it stands as of that date. And then we'll shift into January, and we'll have another more detailed budget workshop that's scheduled for January 11th. We'll be doing a enrollment projection in school by school, grade by grade enrollment forecast. Again, that's another key piece of information with respect to class sizes and staff planning. So that will be in January. And then it's actually, I think, going to be a little bit later than late January, early February, that Governor Healy will release her first state budget plan. I think she might get a month extra. So I think it's probably going to be later February because by statute, the governor has to provide the first budget in fourth Wednesday in January unless there's a new governor. And so she'll get another, I think it's another month to do that and put together her first budget plan. So what that means is, and I don't think it's, has as much significance any longer with the Student Opportunity Act, we kind of have a known, more known number of what Chapter 70 aid will be. But we'll get some preliminary information on what circuit breaker will be. That's a little bit more fluid, and then other types of potential school funding as well. So that will come at that time period. And then there'll be another budget workshop that's tentatively scheduled for February 8th. And then on February 14th, we have the town manager will be publishing his first budget, Fiscal Projection 1. And then Dr. Sawyer plans to present his initial budget to you on the next night, February 15th. And then also, there's no date set yet, but that could be the opportunity to have the second of the 2 meetings with the Board of Selectmen. So there's a TBD there with respect to when that actual date might be. And then in the March time frame, we have, in terms of schedule, we have, and it's on the town calendar as well, the Finance Committee meeting, which is March 25th. And again, that's a Saturday meeting. We don't have specific plots out yet for dates on these, but certainly we'll have a public hearing in March on the fiscal 24 budget, and reports to the school committee on the curriculum, technology, and special education budgets. And then also equally important is the school committee vote on fiscal 24 fees like busing and athletics and preschool tuition. Fewer to talk about because there's fewer fees, thankfully, and no kindergarten tuition. Then in April, there's a hold date for April 5th for final budget workshop if needed. And then mid-April, we'll hear what the State House Ways and Means Committee has to say about the state budget, so we'll see their budget. And then we have scheduled April 12th for the school committee to vote its final budget recommendation. And that's an important date so that there's sufficient time to prepare all the documentation and communication that's required to put out to town meeting members. And as of this date, and I tried to look again today, I don't think the actual Maytown meeting has been set yet. I think the Board of Selectmen are still contemplating, a Saturday format versus the previous pre-COVID, more traditional Monday, or Monday and Wednesday during the week meeting. So I believe they were talking about putting out a survey to the town meeting members and getting some feedback and then making a decision. So we don't yet have a set date for the annual town meeting. So that is your proposed calendar. And happy to take feedback or answer questions or anything else.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Collins. Any questions or feedback?
Just a quick question in terms of timing on the transportation contracts. You know, when we'll have a kind of a firm understanding of where that's going to land?
So right now we have the bid opening scheduled for late January.
Okay.
So we're timing it. We're trying to time it, and you can't time it perfectly everywhere, but the late January timing provides us good information, accurate information to have for the February launch, initial launch. And then it also provides sufficient time, between January and then when a new contractor, if there were to be a new contractor on board for the summer program or the fall, they would need quite a bit of time given the scale of our operation. If there's no change, it's easy.
Right.
With no change with vendor, then it's no consideration there. And then we'll see how the sleep study committee stuff impacts as well. That's why I'm saying it's not quite perfect, but can't satisfy all constraints. And I think the budgetary piece is probably right now a little bit more important. So right now it's late January. Long way of saying it's late January.
Sure. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments, Mr. Collins? Dr. Sawyer, do you have any other comments about the calendar before I think we're seeking a vote on the calendar?
No, I think as it was described, because of the agreement and it's a little bit about a month later than what we typically do under previous circumstances, which gives us more time to be firm on some of the projections. And I think otherwise it's pretty straightforward, and I would ask that you adopt it so we can move forward.
Great. Thank you so very much. If I can then ask for a motion to approve the fiscal year 2024 budget calendar as presented.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor, do so by signifying with an aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, there we go. You have a calendar. So thank you very much, Mr. Collins.
Thank you.
Going to move on to our next agenda item, which is a matter of new business, and that's the cafeteria workers collective bargaining agreement, and we are hoping to seek a vote tonight. I would note that Ms. Fritz and Mr. Wensky, with the assistance of Ms. Malone, Mr. Collins, and Ms. Beth Nichols, our directors of food services, have been working with the Cafeteria Workers Association to negotiate a successor collective bargaining agreement for their members, and recently the parties arrived at a tentative agreement. And as I understand, that was ratified last week. I know we received some materials in our packet, and Mr. Wensky, I understand you, as part of that committee, are offering to walk us through some of those materials.
Definitely.
Thank
So, we were able to negotiate a 3-year contract effective with the 2022-2023 school year and extending through the 2024-2025 school year. The contract changes from the previous contract include wages in year 1, increase in wages to meet market conditions, the averaging 9%. The new step 1 rate for a cafeteria aide is $15.75 per hour, up from $14.30 per hour, which is a 10.14% increase. Wages in year 2 apply 3% to year 1 wage scales, and then wages in year 3 apply 2% to year 2 wage scales. Step progression, where applicable, also paid holidays, at the addition of Juneteenth as a paid holiday if it falls within the school year as we're in session. Also an increase to uniform compensation. So the total projected salary and benefits costs for cafeteria workers for FY23 is $736,591, which is within the current year budget for what is a self-sustaining business unit. I think it's important for the public to know that this is a self-funded unit that is paid for through the revenue generated by the cafeteria services. It does not touch the appropriated budget. So in addition to certainly thanking my partner, Ms. Fritz, on the subcommittee, I also want to thank our Executive Director of HR, Barb Malone, Beth Nichols, our Director of Food Services, Mr. Collins, certainly for his financial guidance and support, and certainly the partnership with the Cafeteria Union and their leadership. They're very helpful, very willing to partner with us and talk about, the things that they face in their day-to-day. And really, I want to thank all the cafeteria staff for the great work that they do. They certainly have experienced quite a lot of change in the last 2 years, as we know. So anything more to add?
Sure. I think, for me, the best thing is that we were able to look at the market and get people into the market because they were below. So we accomplished that goal and set the path for the next 3 years. And I want to also thank everybody. It was a very easy conversation with the entire group that we met with. So thank you for everybody, and I'm glad we were able to finish it.
Right. Any questions from my colleagues? Okay, just one thing, and Mr. Collins, you may be best positioned to answer this, or certainly Mr. Wensky, but we say it's a self-sustaining. For some people who are watching, particularly parents, they're not paying for lunches right now, and so could we just talk about how what that means? So they're not used to paying the bill, so sort of who's paying the bill?
There's no such thing as a free lunch.
Someone is somewhere, but what that looks like.
So it's both federal and state revenue, and the federal government did not fund quote unquote universal meals, so the state legislature stepped in this school year, unlike the prior school year, and made up the difference. So basically, all the revenue that comes in is based upon the meals distributed and documented through our point of sale system on a monthly basis, and Mrs. Nichols has to put together a claim for reimbursement, and associated with each meal type, breakfast or lunch, is a fixed amount of reimbursement that the school district gets. And those monies then get deposited on a monthly basis into the food service account. And then those monies are then distributed to our staff in the form of payroll, wages, and then also payments to our vendors for the food products.
Thank you very much, Mr. Collins. Any other questions or comments? Dr. Sawyer, anything else before I seek a motion?
I also appreciate the work that the bargaining team did to work with, and the folks, also the bargaining team from the cafeteria workers. We just have absolutely terrific cafeteria workers in our district. They're outstanding people. They serve our children really well. They really make connections with them. I can even say, as a parent, I know that, my daughters over the years, they've been really treated extremely well. And that's what you witness if you go into one of our cafeterias during lunchtime. The customer service is excellent. They care very deeply about providing the best quality they can for our kids. One of the universal truths of humanity is that people complain about school lunches, but they're high quality, and they are, and they're making some adjustments because obviously it's still not the same coming out of COVID. The volume right now is tremendous. Lots of families are taking advantage of the fact that lunch is subsidized and is not costing families any money. And so, figuring out ways to move kids through quickly. The new schedule at the high school is helping with that, with reducing the number of kids at each lunch. But they do really good work, and I'm really pleased that their representatives and the school committee were able to come to this agreement, and I certainly recommend its passage. The other piece, and I apologize, Mr. Collins might have already said this, but Mr. Mizikar, the town manager, by law has the ability, the town manager has the ability to vote on collective bargaining contracts that the school committee enters into. He was not here tonight, obviously, but he did communicate to me that he supports the agreement and appreciates the work done by both sides of the table in getting to this new contract.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Dr. Sawyer. With that, then, I thank my colleagues, particularly for the amount of time that they spent in conversations on negotiations as well. Be seeking a motion to ratify the 3-year successor collective bargaining agreement with the Cafeteria Workers Association for the 3-year period starting July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2025 as presented.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor can do so by signifying with an aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And that would pass unanimously. And thank you very much for all the effort there. Thank you. Last item is an approval of minutes. We did receive minutes from the school committee meeting on November 9th, 2022. If folks had a chance to review those, are there any revisions or suggestions for changes? Seeing none, those can be marked as accepted. We do not need to go into executive session tonight, so I will take a motion at this point to adjourn for the evening.
So moved.
Second?
Thank you. And all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Thank you very much, and good night.